Now, Democratic Representative Mike Quigley of Illinois. He, of course, sits on the House Intelligence Committee, which has many, many questions still around the Russia investigation. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Good morning, Poppy.
Good morning to you. Just first, your reaction to what Jessica just described and went through for us on new questions that, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and in the House have for Attorney General Sessions this morning. What are your questions, given this new reporting?
I think it's not that he has a problem with the truth. I think it's easier to say that he's perjured himself at least 3 times. He said that he has not met with the Russians, then he acknowledged the first time, and then the second time at the Mayflower Hotel. And then it was obvious from yesterday's testimony from Mr. Page that Mr. Conaway seemed to acknowledge took place, and it did, that he has perjured himself a 3rd time. To me, Mr. Sessions deserves his time in the chair again before the House and Senate committees to answer these questions once and for all.
So he has not testified before your committee yet. He has testified before your counterparts on Senate Judiciary and Senate Intel. But if he were, as your Democratic colleague in the Senate, Al Franken, suggested last night, he should come and answer some more questions. What is your most pressing question for him at this point, given that you've now accused him of perjuring himself on 3 occasions?
When exactly did you meet and communicate with Russians? And what was the extent of that conversation? What exactly were you talking about? What had to do with the campaign and the incoming Trump presidency?
To be clear, you have said that you have seen, sir, quote, clear evidence of intent to collude on the part of the Trump team. By whom, and what is the evidence?
Yeah, I think we're now talking about 6 different people who are Trump associates. Let's just remember, the president's son acknowledged that he wanted to meet with the Russians, and if, quote, if that's what it is, I love it, let's plan it for late August. We just talked about Cambridge Analytical. Mr. Kushner, after the election, trying to set up a back-channel meeting. At this point in time, you actually need a list. Peter Smith, George Papadopoulos. So the list goes on. At some point in time, the Trump administration should stop calling this a witch hunt, because, after all, the first witches were bagged earlier this week. Tell us exactly what took place.
Congressman, if you didn't hear the president this morning as he was departing in the White House heading on his trip to Asia, let me read you the last bit of what he said when talking to reporters, because he slammed his own Department of Justice for not going after his political enemies, his political foes, and he said they should be looking at those things, talking about the Democrats, talking about John Podesta, etc. And he said, quote, a lot of people are disappointed in the Justice Department, including me. What is your reaction to that?
I think a lot of people means those sitting in the White House right now. The president has failed to take responsibility for anything that has gone wrong in the campaign and during his presidency. I mean, I look back to the Yemen raid. This is the first commander-in-chief I've ever witnessed blame his generals for that. Have someone name me a single instance in which the president said, hey, this was my fault. He doesn't like the way this is going, so he blames someone else. He has done everything he can to deflect, delay, and distract this investigation. And there are elements of obstruction, including the time in which he said that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. And, oh, by the way, firing Comey for, as he said, that Russian thing. It's a clear record. He can't take responsibility. Anything that goes wrong has to be someone else's fault.
All right, let me ask you about something else. As you have probably read this morning, the former Democratic National Committee Chairwoman Donna Brazile has some pretty stunning accusations in her new book, including that the Clinton campaign signed this agreement with the DNC before the election that essentially allowed them to operate the DNC to control funding, et cetera. This is before she was a Democratic nominee. And Senator Elizabeth Warren told our Jake Tapper last night when he asked her, do you believe that it was rigged, and the notion that it was rigged as a result of this on the Democratic side, she said yes. So here's what the president does. He goes after Senator Elizabeth Warren this morning. Here's what he writes. Pocahontas, that's what he calls her, just stated Democrats led by legendary crooked Hillary Clinton rigged the primaries. Let's go FBI and Justice Department. Okay? Now here's how Elizabeth Warren just responded. You might think your tweets are cute, real Donald Trump, but they won't stop Mueller's investigation or keep people out of jail. She also wrote, I understand your desperation to change the subject. Your campaign manager was just indicted for conspiracy against the United States. Your take on all of that?
It is indeed a distraction, and it's just one more example of insulting the American public. Look at this shiny object instead of the most important investigation in our country's history since Watergate. The allegations that she talks about in the book are well worth investigating. The Democratic Party needs to look at itself long and hard to make sure our process is appropriate. But it is by no means comparable to what's taking place in the Mueller investigation.
But let's separate it, because you do bring up, as a Democrat, though, you bring up an important point, that this does bear, that Donna Brazil's allegations do bear investigation, do bear looking into, that the Democratic Party needs to look at itself pretty hard here. Do you agree with Senator Warren in the notion that if this is the case, if Donna Brazil's allegations are true, that it is rigged, that the process was rigged against Bernie Sanders?
Look, I think rigged is a really strong word, but I have no personal knowledge of how that process works. I've never been a part of it, but it doesn't mean I don't care about it, and I'm for a full and open process. Democrats looking at this, and again, making sure that the process works for the American people and the Democratic Party.
Well, Congressman, you choose the word then. You know, other than rigged, how does it sit with you, knowing what you know this morning?
I know only what I've seen in the press at this point in time. I haven't read her book, but I'm open and willing to listen to anything and find out exactly what took place and what we need to do. I'm just stressing. Look, this is a distraction. The President of the United States is being investigated, and his associates, for conspiring with the Russians to attack our democratic process. This is a desperate president who did anything it took to get power, and he's displaying his willingness to do absolutely anything to retain that.
On your point, just quickly, because you said the president is being investigated. Now, your committee gets a lot of intelligence that we, the public, don't get. There are things that you can't share. The president pushes back on that. The White House keeps saying over and over he is not under investigation. Now, if you look at all of the documents, et cetera, that have been pulled and requested by the Mueller team, every indication is that they are looking into the president and many people around the president, as we know. At this point, have you seen any evidence that points you directly to collusion on the part of the president or his team?
Let me put it in the larger context. When I say Trump, I'm talking about Trump administration. I have no idea who the Mueller investigation is targeting. So to be fair, when I'm talking about Trump, I'm talking about the Trump administration and its campaign apparatus.
Congressman, we appreciate you being here.